I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're rolling, dodging, and sprinting through the enemies to reach that beautiful fog gate, as I talk about the 20 worst boss runbacks in the Soulsborne series. Now today we'll be covering entries 20 through 11, and next video we will tackle the top 10. For those unaware, perhaps you started with Elden Ring, where stakes of Marika mostly mitigate their need. A boss runback is the route you take from a checkpoint to get back to a particular boss, and they have been a point of contention for years. After all, some players just want to experience retrying a boss without getting drained by hordes of enemies along the way. The worst boss runbacks are those that take a lot of time, force players to trudge through monotonous level design or awful enemies, effectively padding that lengthens the game's runtime while giving you nothing in return. And if there are no shortcuts, baby, you're in trouble. And just to get this out of the way, Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro have been spared by this video topic, as Sekiro basically doesn't have any boss runbacks outside of a few choice encounters, and those aren't even that bad. While Dark Souls 3 actually has good shortcut level design that makes every boss runback bearable once you know the route. So let's jump right in, my top 20 worst boss runbacks in Soulsborne, ranked. Let me know your least favourites down below. Coming in at number 20, we have Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon from Elden Ring, as the sole Elden Ring representative on this topic. Now, of all the major bosses, as I could fill this list with obnoxious catacomb and cavern encounters, but that would be boring, her and Dragon Lord Placidusax have the longest boss runbacks, but while with the latter you're in the end game and have the skills to reach his boss arena without much issue, alongside some fun platforming that I think adds to the overall scope of finding that secret fight, Rennala is a different case. Stakes of Marika are used throughout Elden Ring to allow players to retry a boss from the entry point, or a grace will be placed right next to the fog wall to allow quick re-access. But there are no stakes of Marika in Raya Lucaria because Rennala hates that puta. After all, Rennala believes that Marika stole Radagon from her, and as such, she who shall not be named's visage is not allowed within the academy walls. Which means that anytime you want to retry Rennala's boss fight, you have to run from the Red Wolf Arena to her high tower. The quickest path is through this shortcut door that leads to Moongrim's courtyard. Otherwise, you'll instead have to dodge the giant boulder trap on the nearby steps instead. Now, on my first playthrough, I took that ladder path because I just didn't have the stamina to out-dodge the mages near that first shortcut. And if you haven't killed Moongrim, he can be a persistent little man, getting between you and the elevator to Rennala. It's by no means an awful boss runback, but when you're part of a game that has all but obliterated the trend, you're still going to stand out like a sore thumb, and I just don't like dodging mage enemies. Any good opportunity to diversify this list so the Dark Souls 2 fanbase doesn't rip me apart is something I will take every single time. At number 19, we have Bloodborne's sole entry on today's list, the Shadows of Yharnam, found in the depths of the Forbidden Woods. As you'll soon see, some boss runbacks are on this list because they're painfully difficult, while others flirt with the exact opposite trait, being painfully dull. The Forbidden Woods as a zone is a tad too big for its own boots. It's easy to get lost once you reach the second half with the snake balls, bigger snake balls, giant pigs, more snake balls, and the blue goobers. Different players might find different paths to the boss because of a few badly placed elevators, and the quickest overall route still takes a good amount of time to run through. You've got to run past a lot of snakes, many of which can strike you if you're not careful, before heading down this cliff to the shortcut. You have to hope you've opened it, because it will lead to the bosses, and once you know where you're going, the run back isn't difficult, but by god, it is a bland, tasteless journey. Many players actually manage to miss the main shortcut, forcing them to run through the area with the pigs upon every retry via a different elevator. And some players, even after opening the main shortcut gate, might not have even found that area prior in their exploration, so they've got no idea how it links up with the rest of the level. And once again, in a game where a majority of the boss runbacks are mitigated with easy-to-find elevators or cool set pieces that make them memorable to run through, the bad stands out once again. From this point on though, it's just the first 3 Souls games that make up the rest of our list because, spoilers, that's just where the bad boss runbacks are. So let's dive in. At number 18, we have Seath the Scaleless from Dark Souls, a rather lengthy boss runback that takes you through the entirety of the Crystal Caves. The closest bonfire is the Duke's Archives balcony, so this boss runback is basically just running through the next area on the normal path. Through the Garden of Crystal Golems, down into the caves themselves, across invisible platforms that, unless you know they're there, you'll likely be cautious on the crossing, down a gap to another large invisible bridge, and then through the Room of the Deadly Clams and the Fog Wall. With that being said, hot take, I find this boss run back to be far less painful than the rest of the fanbase makes it out to be. The pain comes from the crystal caves simply being a bit unfun to navigate, with many of the crystals having very slippery geometry that makes it easy for your character to accidentally zip off into the void. Combine with a few tough-to-avoid crystal golems along the way through the lower half, and you've got that recipe for a well-talked-about boss runback. The clams at the end, while their own can of worms, ironically are only a pain on your first time triggering Seath, as some of them can follow you into the boss arena prior to the fog gate spawning, effectively causing you to deal with 2 bosses instead of just Seath. On future runs, like the boss runbacks, they'll only swarm you after you kill Seath and the fog gate dissipates. But if you choose to kill them before entering said fog gate, you could lose a lot of resources in the process, so it's a bit of a lose-lose. As such, this boss runback has a few determinant factors that makes it a bit less of a hassle in comparison to others coming up on this list. It's still not fun. I don't really like the Crystal Caves to begin with, but we're still on the starters here. The main course is yet to be served. At number 17, we have the Bed of Chaos from Dark Souls, who has the potential to have 3 different boss runbacks, ranging from a bit boring to generally tedious. The most basic runback is from the first Izalith bonfire, where you find Solaire being Depressy Spaghetti, running through the whole lava lake, up the ruins, and then over to the boss. It's easily the longest trek, and will take you past all those irritating bounding demons, and first-time players going in blind won't know about the hidden bonfire on the other side of the lava lake. I pity them. The second runback is from said hidden bonfire, and the only downside to both this and the first runback are that you always have to have the orange charred ring on to make it across the lava lake to the main ruins, and in a game that only allows you to wear 2 rings at a time, if your build revolves around using specific rings, having to switch out after crossing the lava can be very tedious. Beyond that, it's just the classic boss run. The final is from the Daughters of Chaos bonfire, past the Chaos bugs, and across the bridge where the Titanite demon lurks. I tend to use this as my main route in Izalith, but the Titanite demon can 1 or 2-shot endgame builds due to its high damage, making the path extremely risky. I'm not timing the runbacks because my videos are more vibe focused rather than based on objective fact, but I would be curious to see just how long the Izalith runback routes all take, because by god do they feel long in-game. Further enhanced by them being for a boss that can kill you for 1 brief mistake, wasting potentially precious hours of your time. If you're bad at the Bed of Chaos fight, I can understand this runback being far higher on this list, but as someone who's been Stockholm syndromed, I fuck with the tree, and it's not the biggest obstacle for me anymore. Rounding out our first 5 entries, we have number 16, the Tower Knight runback from Demon Souls. Now, Demon Souls is an interesting case when it comes to boss runbacks, because you have to progress through the entire level from the very start to reach its boss if you die. Some levels provide shortcuts or have a simple enough route that I feel comfortable navigating. 1-2 is not one of those levels, for it is the originator of one of my least favourite tropes in Soulsborne, the Wyvern level hazard trope. A red dragon will constantly be flying across the ramparts attempting to burn you to a crisp, and unless you want to sit there for a good 40 minutes attempting to chip the dragon to death in a very specific location, you'll be inclined to head below to the underpass filled with hollows and, more terrifying, fucking dogs. Getting through all those enemies, emerging at the other side, and then getting blasted by the dragon right before the boss fog, or having to deal with the 2 stronger knights near the boss fog while having limited space to do combat, oh, it's stressful at the best of times. The enemies here are just placed perfectly enough to make the runback as painful as possible, and there's absolutely no way to skip the pain beyond murdering the dragon, and you're highly unlikely to have the knowledge or the skill to kill said dragon without looking up a guide. It's not worth the pain, but because the level length isn't massive and it's mostly a straight line, it manages to score fairly high on this list, because remember, these early entries are the least offensive runbacks. Now we're starting to enter the more devious concoctions of FromSoft's machinations. Oh my god, it's March already? And we're getting closer to my goal of 20,000 subscribers by the summer of 2024. Insert obligatory YouTuber, look at how many of you aren't subscribed comment here. If by the end of the video you enjoy what you watch, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. And number 15, we're actually continuing with the theme of Demon Souls Boletaria levels as we look at the runback for Old King Alant 1-4. Now this is an interesting take because this isn't a long level, and the main danger once again is a dragon that takes perch above the gate leading to the elevator and the boss fog. So in the PS3 version of the game, you have to run through a few rooms with tough enemies, as well as a large bridge where the dragon spits fire at you. And on my first playthrough, I really struggled with the timing here. Past that is the final run-up where Bior of the Twin Fangs can help you distract the dragon. It's a long run, and wasn't something I had a positive experience with because I just kept getting one-shot by the flames. But I'm aware that in the Demon Souls PS5 remake, a shortcut was added to 1-4 to make the experience a little easier. You can pull a lever after making it to the final steps, and it will open a door that allows you to skip the sequence where you run across the bridge, which was where most of my deaths ended up occurring in the PS3 version. So with that in mind, this entry is specifically for the PS3 edition of Demon Souls. The shortcut is an addition the remake adds that should have been included in the original in the first place, but as I've only ever played the PS3 version of this game, I've never been able to enjoy that luxury. I just pray there are no wyverns ready to burn me away in the Erd Tree DLC in this fashion, because it's a trope I'm entirely done with, and never feels fair in any of its implementations. At number 14, we have the Capra Demon from Dark Souls, introducing yet another case of a boss where there are two potential routes you can run back from, while also having the same boss issue as the Bed of Chaos, where regardless of the route you approach from, you can be almost instantly defeated with just one wrong movement upon entering the fight. And that just means the two routes are going to get a lot of use. The first is the traditional path through Lower Undead Burg, taking the stairs down, going through the streets dealing with annoying dogs, and hollow assassins that can parry you if you so much as breathe in the wrong direction. Or you can take the more scenic route from Firelink Shrine, using the shortcut near the depth store that leaves you dealing with two assassins and a couple of doggos. The perk here is that you can get bonfire kindling from Firelink. The con is that it's a long walk with not much to do and can get extremely tedious running back all that way. As you can see, I'm just not a fan of boss runbacks that waste my time. Shortcuts worked in Dark Souls 3 because most of them led directly to a bonfire. Not directly to an area that's a 1-minute walk to the nearest bonfire, you know? Dark Souls has that interconnected world, but the placement of the bonfires is far less convenient than later entries. I enjoy that, but I've spent hours running through that aqueduct more than I'd like to admit, and I just don't want to do it again. But I also don't want to go through Lower Undead Burg with all the assassins, so what is a man to do but bitch about this runback on a YouTube video in 2024? Olé! We have our first Dark Souls 2 entry at number 13. We have the Old Dragon Slayer found in Hyde's Tower of Flame. Specifically, the Scholar of the First Sin Edition, as the original game is much more lax on the enemy placements, perhaps a little bit too much so. Scholar tried to remedy this by peppering Hyde Knights across the area alongside the Giant Knights that already populated the zone previously. And for good measure, we now have a wyvern outside the Cathedral of Blue, which was a good decision. Now we see the dragon rider rides. The issue of this boss runback is that either you attempt this boss before the Dragon Rider, in which case you fight the usual enemies plus the Hyde Knights and the Wyvern on the way to the boss, or you attempt this boss after the Dragon Rider, in which case you fight all of those aforementioned enemies, plus every other Hide Knight in the level, because killing the Dragon Rider aggroes every single one. They're already some of the toughest early game enemies to handle solo, let alone in groups, and the game just throws them all at you and says, fight. Now this entry actually brings up a very good point. Is a boss runback only a runback after you have died to the boss once, or do we consider just getting to the boss a boss runback, because you have to succeed in the level to reach said boss? And this is the problem with this entry, because the Wyvern only appears on your first visit. Once it is killed for good, and it needs to be killed in order for you to even access the boss fog. So I would say it's up to you, the viewers. Do you think the Wyvern factors into this entry at all? Because you still have Hide Knights to run from, but you can outrun and outdodge them with the right moves. It's just a bit tedious and annoying to do so. I wanted to highlight this runback because the post-Dragon Rider variant is just an absolute bitch no matter what anyway, because the Hide Knight army more than earns their keep in driving me up the wall. Something you'll see as a recurring problem for Dark Souls 2 and their enemy placements. Taking the penultimate spot on today's list, we have number 12, Gravelord Nito, my least favourite boss runback in Dark Souls, and need I explain? I think it's very clear why this is one of the worst, but oh, what the hell, it is my job. Let's talk about why it sucks. So there are two locations in the Tomb of the Giants where you can start your runback from, either the bonfire at the start of the area, or the well-hidden one nearer to the Ash Lake vista. In my original playthrough of Dark Souls many years ago, I didn't know about that second bonfire. I ran from the first bonfire all the way through the entire Tomb of the Giants to Nito, past skeleton dogs of hell, archers, the big boys, towering skeleton cylinders, and that room with the pinwheels and the dead babies, all to reach a boss fog that forces me to take damage before I even trigger the fight. Oof. But even with the secondary bonfire, you still have to run a decent way. The paths are narrow and winding, so it's easy to slip off and into the void. The pinwheel room is confusing in its layout, and they attack frequently, so it's easy to accidentally eat a face full of flames. And all of this isn't taking into account that if you don't have a light source, you're fucked. I usually have the sunlight maggot on hand, or the skull lantern if I go for Nito first, but I don't think anybody is particularly jazzed about running through the Tomb of the Giants. Bonus points for my current playthrough, as I actually had a vagrant spawn on my way to Nito, and it caught me off guard. Look, I can handle the other Dark Souls 1 boss runbacks, because at least I can see when I'm going through them, and I can switch my brain off a bit while running through corridors or past easy enemies. I just don't think I can do that when heading back to Nito and his horde of skeleton twinks. Tomb of the Giants just isn't it at the best of times, and when you're trying to conserve health and Estus to reach the boss, it becomes so unfun that you're thinking, how long before I'm out of this hell? But even so, Dark Souls still has baby boss runbacks when compared to Dark Souls 2 and Demon Souls, and it's not even close. Now for my hottest take, scorching to end the first part of this mini-series off. At number 11, it's the blue smelter demon from Dark Souls 2's Iron Passage. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it. While I do think that the Iron Passage is an absolute flaming pile of pee-pee-poo-poo watermelon garbage, the actual boss run isn't as bad as it's made out to be. The challenge here is that if you fail the run to the Iron Gate at the start of the area, you have to take a lower path, which leads past the usual enemies of the DLC, but with a couple of mages that can cast slow on your character. This means that you'll be moving at half the speed you normally would, making you susceptible to damage. This sucks. That's why this boss runback is the 11th worst. But when I think about my success rate at reaching the boss in this area, it's actually a lot higher than you would expect. The challenge of the Iron Passage comes from its awful enemy placement and struggle to collect everything it has to offer. Just doing a quick run to the boss, you'll get there 33% of the time, which, while not great, isn't bad, and the actual distance you cross is quite short. Combined with you facing an actual good boss at the end of the gauntlet, and the desire to do this runback is surprisingly high. Plus, this area is overshadowed by a much worse runback in the same DLC that we'll see in the next video. I just don't enjoy boss runbacks that inflict status effects or slowness because it's so unbalanced for a single player experience, and that's why it's here. But the enemies for the most part are pretty fair, and it's over relatively quickly. You can't polish a turd, but you can pop a plastic bag over it, chuck it in a nearby bin. What are we talking about again? And that's the first part of our list. Tune in next time to see my true top 10 worst boss runbacks in Soulsborne. It's a real list of the worst of the worst. Or if you're watching this video way after release, check the description, a video link to part 2 can be found there. So be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future content and gaming videos and all that lovely goodness. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord, whatever's comfortable for you. I'm not very active on any of them, to be honest, but you kind of have to have social media if you're making videos online. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members. Thank you so much for the support for another month. You are amazing. And a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. You guys are cool too. I will be phasing my Patreon out and moving entirely to the YouTube channel membership system soon, so if you're interested in becoming a channel member, you get 24-hour access to my Tuesday videos. Early, it's a lot of fun. Links down below, $4.99. I need to script these outros more. Thanks for watching, and I will see you for part 2. Adios.